saying we have to be ideal like them today, but we need time to be like them or better than them to learn from them, because they are not making miracles. What they are doing is they're doing practical things, learning from the international world. So when it comes to housing, when it comes to budget, we don't need really to borrow today, but we need to verify what assets we have, and we really maximize the income out of these assets to help Egypt and to help the Egyptian out of this.
And you'll find many of these assets in the housing sector.
That's the first. Real estate, this is really the real assets that people can invest in.
So you agree that borrowing domestically at these high interest,
it's killing. It's adding overhead and adding really heavy duty to the coming generation, which I don't want them to be born and each one of them has to pay the money that we have borrowed to feed his parents and to do the budget. Now, we have also to consider people in the government. We have to minimize them every day. I'm not saying to get them out of the government, no, to give them better jobs, individual, to tell them, listen, private sector, the one who will give you this. Work in a restaurant, work in a coffee shop, work in a factory, work in a trade company, and do not say that I have to work in the government, because the government will give you the minimum. Again, what is he doing in the government? Is he doing production that it's really paralleled according to his really needs of money? When we say the minimum wage 700, Dr. Duha was saying, I don't want to give him 700 pounds, because 700 pounds is like $120 a month. That's $4 a day. That's not enough for a family. I would like to give him 2,000 pounds, but he has to produce 3,000 pounds a month in order to take 2,000. So really, the education that I would like to pass to the Egyptian individual.
You want the income to be linked to the production.
Exactly. If the Egyptian citizen and individual and student and farmer and worker understand this concept, there's production, yes, there is money. If there is no money, there is no honey. So he has to produce in order to make this money. Seriously. And when he goes with this, the vision in the school, in the TV, all the media will teach him this, he will make lots of money. So borrowing domestically, not the right time. But verifying the assets of Egypt, inviting countries to come and invest in Egypt. Again, I'm not asking for money. I'm not asking to give them troubleshooter. I'm not asking to give them hard times to take their money and go through arbitration international. I will give you an example. I was surprised that there's one of our largest hotel. It's a government hotel, Winter Palace Hotel. The new Winter Palace that has been working and has hundreds of rooms was completely demolished. Not changed the management, destroyed completely, and the government said we will build. Now, who will pay for this demolishment? So instead of really leasing these and taking minimum income every month from the company who will lease, again is selling. We are not selling anymore, because Egypt has to own their own land. Let's do like United States, like UK, United Kingdom. We lease for 10 years, 20 years, up to 90 years. But the land goes back to Egypt, goes back to the Egyptian, goes back to the government. So I found out through, the governor of Luxor, that the Winter Palace was demolished completely, the new one, and they would like to build. Who's going to build? The government. Do we have money now, instead of feeding the Egyptian, to build hotels or demolishing hotels? That's not proper, of course. But again, I'm not against the principle. I'm against that we have assets completely unused, improper, and could make lots of money to the Egyptian government and to the Egyptian themselves, and improve the quality of the construction in Egypt.
All right. Dr. Ashmani, dear viewers, we have with us now over the phone Dr. Ali Slimane, and he's professor of economics at the BUE, British University in Egypt, former first undersecretary of the Ministry of Economy. Thank you very much, Dr. Slimane, for joining us.
Thank you very much.
Sir, what's your reading of the new budget proposal that was ratified by the Supreme Council of the Armed Forces?
I should say that we shouldn't be very harsh on the new budget, actually, because this new budget was done in a very short time. Second, it did not receive enough discussion, as budgets usually do. It didn't go to the parliament. It didn't have any popular discussion. And it's what we can expect from it should be mostly a continuation of what we had before. What we need, and I agree with all your speakers, is that what we need a longer-term view of the budget revenue and budget expenses. This cannot be done overnight. If you do it overnight, you will cause a lot of disruption in the economy. I agree with your speakers that the first thing we should look for, perhaps rationalization of government expenditure. We had, unfortunately, at least for the last 10 years, we had sort of an imperial government, you know, big expenses, cars, and so on. If you look at the presidency and how the president with so many locations, with a lot of resources and so on. الأمن المركزي, or internal security, also is eating a lot of money from the budget. And then the worst case is that you had so many big projects that was not fully utilized. If you look at Tushka, for example. You invested a lot of money to make a reservoir and to take the water from lower ground to higher ground, and then in the end you reclaimed 10,000 acres. This was a total misuse of resources. And then you had a similar project. I was perhaps helpful in getting the money from some of the other funds for the Sinai projects. And you had this tunnel under the Suez Canal where you can get the water to Sinai. And the number of acres that were utilized in Sinai is laughable. So you had all of these investments that you didn't fully utilize. As Mr. Ashmawi, your guest, was saying, you had also these prime locations everywhere. If you go to Luxor, for example, you find the governor is living in a very nice mansion on the Nile. That should be a hotel. Same for Aswan. The best locations all over the country are taken by government buildings. You should really think of these government buildings as the family jewels that you should really, sell and use the money in more productive uses. Also, you have human resources which are not used properly. For example, the Ministry of Agriculture. They have maybe about 70,000 engineers, agricultural engineers. All of these people go in the morning to their offices in Doki or in Cairo or Giza. They sign and then they go home in the afternoon. They have not helped any farmer to produce better crops. All of the extension service, which is made India self-sufficient in wheat and so on, is very dismal in Egypt. So you have good resources, but you are not using them properly. You don't have the right economic policy to do that. So that's in terms of resources. In terms of revenue, definitely we need additional sources of local revenue. All the new sectors that were rising very rapidly in Egypt, real estate, stock market, services, we're paying the least taxes. You are still depending on tax on industry, you are not, and so on. But if you are making $1 million overnight in the stock market, you pay zero. I know there was a big resistance to the idea that was floated to have a capital gains tax. All the world did have a capital gains tax, and we did not even impose 1%. The calamity of all of this is that you extend this generosity to the foreign investor. If you have somebody from outside coming in, play in the market, make millions of dollars, he can transfer the whole sum outside without paying a penny.
Sir, I think most of the critics said that they didn't disagree with that in principle, but it's just that the timing was so harsh for investors who already had lost most of their money due to the global financial crisis and then the unrest that followed the peaceful 25th of January revolution. So already, I mean, the investors on the stock market have lost a lot. So the talk, I think, was about the timing and not the principle itself.
But you know, you are putting the tax on profits, not past profits. If you have a tax, it will apply to the future profits. So if a guy tomorrow makes $100,000, it's all right to ask him to pay 10% or for 15%, because after all, he made the money in Egypt, which has provided him with the environment, provided him with the security, provided him with the opportunity. So we are not taking out all of his profits. We are just sharing the profits because he has a responsibility to the rest of the society.
Right.
And then the other question that you were raising, I think it's very important,
yes,
about the real estate,
yes,
which is frozen for years and years. In my street, we have tens of apartments which have been closed for years because the rent is only £5 a month or £10 a month, and these people expect one day that their grandchildren will use these apartments.
Right. And Dr. Suleiman, I think that sometimes you would see even low housing units closed, not just middle class or upper class. Sometimes even low cost housing units are totally shut, and this is frustrating for many who see a lot of closed housing units but don't have a single house.
I think the idea is that you should put a tax on unutilized properties. It makes sense to give people a break if they are using a place, but if they are just saving it for the future and denying others the opportunity to use it, you should then put a tax on this. But these taxes cannot happen overnight, and they cannot happen from one side. It has to be a result of a dialogue, a national dialogue, a social dialogue, that will only come, in my view, after we have the elections, we have a parliament, we have a president, that will have to put the cards on the table and tell people, listen, we cannot go on as before.
One final question, Dr. Suleiman, before you leave us, and it's something, I'm going to ask Dr. Ashmawi about, and haven't had the chance to get an answer from him yet, but Dr. Duha Abdul Hamid from the AUC talked to us or hinted at this point before the subsidies policies regarding oil products specifically, and I'm going to ask you specifically about some proposals we heard on lifting subsidies on the premium oil products or the use or on private use. I'm not talking about the industry here. I'm talking about private use. For the luxury cars shouldn't get advantage of cheap oil products and so on. How do you see this? Not just the luxury cars. Others are even talking about the
way I understand it is like 90% of the subsidies goes to the oil sector. And a lot of this money also goes to gasoline and perhaps premium gasoline. Of course, Egypt has the price we pay for gasoline in Egypt is about 1/4 maybe of what the Europeans pay, or even less. Of course, our incomes are not as high as the Europeans, and I'm not sure whether this so-called subsidy means actual outlay by the government, or is it only a comparison between the international price and the local price? But in all cases, I think in this post-revolution conditions, I think it's due to ask the people who can afford it to pay more. So if you impose a little bit more on premium gasoline, I think this would be acceptable. So this would be my view on this subject.
All right, thank you very much, Dr. Ali, Professor of Economics at the BUE and former First Undersecretary of the Ministry of Economy. Dr. Ashmawi, the subsidies policy regarding oil products, do you think it should be revisited?
Two comments on the Mr. Suleiman first, which is very important. Why do we need the ministers and the government to be in ideal location on the River Nile and on the Mediterranean and on the Red Sea? We could have a small apartment for the governor, one of them, really small office, but the rest of them, they should be removed, and those real estate should go back to be leased to foreigners, to business people, that the government will make money. It will belong to Egypt. That's number one. Do we need the culture minister to have villa in Zamalek on the Nile? It costs really £100 million. Those £100 million, Egypt needs more than this. So I'm talking about really something so fancy. Do we need 5 cars for each minister? 2 cars in the front of him, 2 cars behind him? So the over budget.
This is already changing, isn't it?
No. The location, the assets are in the real estate. The assets are in the car.
I'm talking about the number of cars and so on.
I hope it will be changed better. Do we need, like he mentioned, this is a guy from the government. He's an ex-minister. Do we need 70,000 engineer in the agriculture ministry? 70,000 getting their salaries, and they ask for more, and they ask for offices, and they ask for cars, and they ask for desks, they ask for electricity every day. So what I'm saying is the government has to realize, the prime minister, whatever producing to Egypt, yes, stay on top of my head. Ahlan wa sahlan. He can stay, he eats, he takes salary, he takes car, if this is needed. But again, now, to answer your question, subsidized gas. Now, when me and you buy 2 cars, one, I will buy a taxi, and you will buy a private car. Who pays customs more? Private car. This is all over the world. Why? Because taxi is a service. So now the oil should be the same. If you have a private car, you should pay real the price of the gas because it's private. It's up to you. If you can afford it, that's fine. But the government has really to give to the guy who cannot afford to buy a car, who can